There's one thing I love in this world. It's eating asbestos. You know, like child main comes with the turf. If there's another thing in this world that I love, it's verticality in video games. And let me tell you, right now has never been a better time for us to make our own vertical builds within Genshin's teapot. It's all thanks to this little guy, the vertical landform. On their own, they're really useful, right? You can prop up buildings and other furnishings and clip them together like you can with regular landforms, but there's a secondary use for them. Using these landforms, you can also do a technique called floating, where you essentially suspend the furnishing in midair, letting you take away the landform while the furnishing on top of it still remains. When you combine it with clipping, this is easily one of the most versatile and useful techniques in your arsenal. So, enough dilly-dallying, let's show how it's done. To begin, take out a vertical landform and place the furnishing you want to float on top of it. By the way, disclaimer, this works with any furnishing that lets you stack another furnishing on top of it, so regular landforms work, and for interiors, any shelf that lets you place another furnishing on top of it also works, but for the sake of convenience, I'm going to be demonstrating using the vertical landforms. Set the height to whatever you want. If you, for example, want to make stairs, you'll want to increase the height of the landform by 0.3 units, which you can see on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Now click on the furnishing and make sure its hitbox is blue. If you're in the middle of floating something within a build, you're probably going to need to clip the furnishing first before you can float it because it has to be blue in order for this to work. If you don't know how to shake furnishings to clip them into one another, I have another guide that goes all in depth on that stuff. Anyway, the tricky part comes next. Looking from below the furnishing up towards it, you need to line up the underside of the furnishing's blue hitbox with the top of your screen and then click that underside when it's just barely showing up at the top. You'll know you've done it right when you click, you hear this sound, and you see it briefly flash from red back to blue again. If you did it right, you'll be able to hit confirm, which again is why we need this furnishing to be blue when we first click it. You can then drag the vertical landform away from the floated object to set up the next one. And if it didn't work, then, you should know the drill. The furnishing will just move along with the landform when you try dragging it away. Think of every furnishing as this box. The lit up square part is just the underside of it, and it's really important that you're clicking below that underside instead of above it or straight on. Now, if you hear this sound, that means you accidentally rotated it, and you just need to get a little bit closer and a little bit lower to the furnishing to try again. If you click the furnishing and it gets sent way off in the background. Basically, the reason why it's doing this is because it's trying to send it off to other terrain, so all you have to do to fix this is just pick a different angle. When you're again looking up at the underside of the furnishing, wherever you're clicking at, make sure that you're clicking on the sky and not on terrain. So the way that I understand it, and honestly, take anything I say with a grain of salt, okay? But whenever you're clicking on the bottom side of a furnishing, you're basically telling the game to teleport that furnishing to whatever terrain is in the background of where you're clicking at. When there actually is walkable terrain, that's what sends the furnishing over into the background, but when the sky's there, right, there's nothing actually there. It's a skybox, it's not like an actual tangible polygon, and that's what locks the position in place, I think. Maybe. Bottom line, this was one of the biggest things that threw me off when I was first learning how to float. If you find yourself continually accidentally teleporting furnishings into the background, just rotate your camera 90 degrees, 180 degrees, right? Just rotate it so that the sky is in the background and you should be good. Now, believe me, okay, it takes a while to get a good sense of when you're in that perfect spot to float it. When you're just starting out, it might get frustrating to get that feeling for it. But believe me, stick with it and it'll finally click. Here's some general tips that I've learned after doing it for dozens and dozens of hours. Before you start, especially if you're playing on PC, make sure to go into your settings and decrease your camera sensitivity. I normally play at 3, but for doing this, I always set it down to 1. In general, this is just going to make your life a lot easier because it's going to take a lot less effort to really finagle the furnishings in your viewing angle in a way where you can actually see the bottom side of that furnishing for easier clicking. Now, for all my mobile and PlayStation users, I have some excellent news. You can float, okay? I've tested on both platforms. Here's me doing it on mobile on my really shitty Pixel 3, okay? I'm talking tiny screen, runs at 6 frames a second. Just look at this, okay? Look at how this game runs. I would even argue it's easier than PC because the touch controls actually let you really make these finer micro adjustments that help with getting that perfect viewing angle. Now, for my PlayStation handies, it's a lot more complicated. You can't float the traditional way that I've been showing so far, but there's actually a secondary way to float that I personally have never seen anybody cover before, so hey, this might be breaking news. It's a little involved and I'm probably gonna make its own dedicated video just to really show what's going on with this tech, but basically, on PlayStation, just like with PC and mobile, you do have to get low to the ground and you have to look up at the furnishing while selecting it. That doesn't change. What does change is the fact that your cursor goes away after you've selected a furnishing. With both PC and mobile, once you've selected a furnishing, right, you can still click on it again to actually initiate the float, but PlayStation isn't able to. So instead, while still looking up at the furnishing and the landform that it's on, you have to drag the furnishing to the very edge of the landform. And just like before, you do have to make sure that the landform is blue before you're able to float it. So on PlayStation, the easiest way to clip a furnishing is to just rotate the left analog stick in a circle, like you've seen me do here both with the landform previously and now here with this table. Once you've got it clipped, again, we're making sure that the camera is down low to the ground, looking up towards the furnishing and the landform, and you drag the furnishing to the very edge of the landform. It'll actually stick on the edge and automatically float on its own. You'll know you've done it right when it gets to the edge of the landform, it won't move anywhere, and it ends with a blue hitbox around it, which lets you confirm it and then lock it into place. If you're looking down and up the furnishing, instead of the furnishing sliding off the landform, it instead gets locked on the edge, and when you let go of changing its direction, or its position, I should say, that will initiate the float, and it'll turn blue and allow you to confirm and then float it. In my opinion, it's harder to do stairs and to really finely tune the adjustment of where the furnishing is, because you essentially can only float furnishings at the edges of these landforms that you're placing them down on, which just naturally kind of constricts some of the things that you can do. But I'm showing this to show you that it is possible, and with enough practice, you can still definitely do the same builds that PC and mobile Andes are doing. And it's also worth mentioning that this method specifically is kind of good for some very niche things. Like, for example, on PC, I actually find it's easier to use this method than it is to use the traditional float method for really big furnishings like this Inazuma Shrine. So who knows, play around with it. Even if you are on PC or mobile, experiment with this method, see if you can maybe unlock even other tech that stems off of it, or just other more niche uses that make it a lot more handy than the traditional way. The size of a furnishing determines how easy or hard it'll be to float, along with how close to the ground you're floating. Large furnishings and floating higher off the ground are easier, while small furnishings and floating closer to the ground are harder. I'll use these small Inazuma lanterns as an example. In order to float these, you actually have to position them in a way where the landform they're on completely covers your view. You can still click through landforms to the underside of the furnishings you're trying to float. You just have to gain that sense of where the furnishing exists in 3D space by not having that blue hitbox as a reference point. If you hear this sound, again, that's the rotating sound, just try inching forward a little bit without changing your camera angle and try clicking on the same spot. And there you have it. Once you've mastered floating, you can do all sorts of amazing things with it. One of the most useful is making stairs, but you can also combine buildings in interesting ways. You can set up really cool obstacle courses using floated furnishings, and you can even create entirely new furnishing styles. Again though, floating takes a while to get a hang of. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below, and I'll do my best to make a pinned FAQ comment just like my other guide video has. If you learned something new, hitting the video with a like and even subscribing to the channel is the best way to help out this young, budding slime. My hero. I just created a new teapot realm, fully taking advantage of floating to hang up lanterns everywhere and stack onsen on top of one another. Check out the time lapse if you want to see this tech in action. And either way, thanks a ton for watching. See you for whatever the next video may or may not be. Bye bye!